Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. Strange presenter talking about unusual albums of all sorts, right? So first off, I have to say, what are we getting ourselves in for today? As I mentioned on our video for Freed from the World by New Life Deluxe, my understanding and knowledge of the Vaporwave genre is, and its many subsets is incredibly limited. However, considering how amusingly interesting that album was, I want to try and make a little bit more of an effort with the genre. And so when I came across this unusual album whilst browsing around through the channel Music from the Internet, link is below of course, I figured I should try do my best to talk about this one, as it is incredibly strange but oddly delightful as well. This is one of those albums where it was the artwork that just lured me in, forcing me to discover what on earth was going on here. So let's discuss it then. Today I present what I think is titled Bayi Hot Pot Jacuzzi by Donojiiten. So of course, let's ask ourselves the question, who is Donojiiten? Well, we're going to do another one of those videos where I just give up immediately and say that I don't know. Researching into this artist, it mostly only brought up information regarding their discography across, various websites, as well as their Bandcamp and so on and so forth. But when it comes to finding out who the artist behind the project is, it seems that there's no real way to find out. And that, nobody actually knows when it comes to the wikis and things like that, even the Vaporwave wiki doesn't seem to have an article about this person, so who are they? They could be anybody, who knows? So essentially what we've got here is another one of those very strange projects where there's just no information to go on, and so all we can go on, of course, is just what we're being presented with here. And so, Bayi Hot Pot Jacuzzi, this is an incredibly strange album, essentially, with this weird sort of Pirates-of-the-Caribbean aesthetic presented to us in this weird AI-generated image of Captain Jack Sparrow, it seems. It's so incredibly weird and off-putting and uncanny, and yet there's something really weirdly fun and delightful about this album. So let's talk about the music then, shall we? So Bayi Hot Pot Jacuzzi is made up of 2 tracks on the Bandcamp page. The colossal 42-minute long Seagull, according to Google Translate. And so basically speaking, this track is just what the album is. The final track on this album is just a second long, consisting of seemingly nothing, but we will discuss that a bit later on. And so when we talk about this album, I feel like we're mostly just talking about this one track, Seagull. So get comfortable, because there's a lot of it. Essentially what we seem to have here is just an incredibly washed out and slushy jazz track of sorts, I would say, offset by this swirling and roaring of the very waves themselves, a kind of hybrid of, weird jazz notions and vaporwave notions, and slush wave, I think, is the genre as well. And it just creates this weird musical odyssey that just flows in and around the scene. And it's a rather hypnotizing droning experience, I might add. It just places you in the very epicenter of the sea itself. And as it just progresses, rather slowly, I might add, you just hear these various layers just start twisting and morphing around that very scene itself, creating these very unusual little details that are so momentary that it's like they never happened at all, whilst other moments just become louder and more tumultuous within the very mix itself, just droning and droning away as though somebody, whoever this is, has just stretched out the tiniest inference of a sound at sea into a 40-minute odyssey. Yeah, it's an odd track to say the least, no doubt, no doubt. But it's and I think for me, it's perhaps the incredibly persistent presence of that jazzy piano, which is buried so oddly within the very mix itself, you know, washed out and drowned out in amongst those various effects, that make this an oddly enjoyable listen, though. It's peculiar because it feels like being in a lounge room of some smoky 1950s dive bar that is being slowly pushed down into the very water itself as the building just crumbles apart from the strength of the waves. And in spite of all that, the jazzy piano, whatever it is, wherever it is, probably far below into the dark depths themselves by now, it just somehow manages to continue playing those intermittent jazzy little chords. And all in all, it's so oddly and strangely delightful though, especially with all that sort of, you know, that wash of distorted ambience that builds up so much of the droning elements of this track. It just makes it oddly pleasant, I feel, and it's very peculiar because it's so weird and uncanny and just not really anything in this odd little way, but oddly fun, oddly charming, I'd say. Of course, don't get me wrong, there is an incredibly ridiculous element to all of this as well. One just has to gaze into that incredibly off-putting AI-generated artwork of Captain Jack Sparrow just to kind of get an imprint of some of the seriousness of this kind of record, I would say. And I say off-putting as it's an image like this that just really gives me the uncanny valley effect. But I feel as though that's perhaps the very point of a release like this, though. It's meant to make you feel that way. And I think as well, it kind of expresses a sort of playful element to it, which definitely comes across in Donojiiten's entire discography, I might add. And so with this one, this sort of weird narrative of Pirates-of-the-Carribean-Wave, I guess you could describe it as, it comes across on a bunch of the records, and it's such a weird and unusual aesthetic, but the ridiculousness of it all is just what keeps drawing me back in. And to be fair, I'm actually kind of glad I was drawn into it, especially with that aesthetic of AI-generated Pirates of the Caribbean, because non-ironically, I just find this really relaxing and delightful. The more it goes on, the more you just get these little weird details that you just find within the very composition of sorts, and you know, it gets stranger and stranger as it goes along. You know, with 42 minutes, it's so much time for this track to just gently explore itself, essentially. But as well, within it, you'll just oddly get little intermittent moments, like a sort of warped voice, perhaps, or, you know, just even a wave or something like that. And it's so momentarily there. But you also wonder, was it even there? Did we just go past it too quickly for us to discern the detail of, perhaps? But it's oddly delightful though, you know. It, like, especially with those little moments, they really stand out in amongst this composition actually, as they become just, they kind of highlight themselves with just how sporadic they are, I would say. And I'll say it is, like I said, it is kind of a returning feature of sorts, but these moments are so spaced out across this huge, you know, this huge runtime essentially, that, you know, they're just, you know, so they're very present when they do show up. And they become these odd little moments, but it's so far few in between, if that makes sense. But for me, perhaps it's the waves or the odd calmness to those, you know, clunky, almost atonal chords perhaps, but it just makes it an effortless drift across the sea itself. And it's humorous, but that doesn't mean that it's not also nice and charming within its own right, of course, you know. It's certainly a composition that'll push you into this meandering stasis, no doubt. But there's just something strangely fun and delightful about that. And so to go back to the album's second track, just to discuss it a little bit, from my research into Donojiiten, it seems that this is something they like to do on a bunch of their albums. And although their discography is rather small so far, it seems, we can also start to see some forms of conventions as a Vaporwave artist, you know, starting to come through amongst their various releases. And those releases themselves are somewhat varied, you know. We've got the ones exploring this Pirates of the Caribbean aesthetic, but there's also video games and arcades as well, actually. But across all of them, more often than not, you will find in amongst the one composition that makes up the album, a second track of a single second, essentially. And this is a single short second of nothing, it seems, just nothing happening. But what it seems to allow this artist to be doing is slightly expand upon the world building of sorts within these very releases by providing simply additional text, within the very track listing. And I, oddly enough, find this to just end up creating another additional mystery in amongst the many mysteries that this kind of album would present, of course. And it's another thing for you as a listener to essentially just try your best to work out for yourself, I feel. And whilst there might be specific context for those sporadic little tracks, perhaps, those names, I feel as though they're perhaps interpreted. And so when it comes to track 2 on this album, the symbol doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before, and in fact the Google Translator has no idea what to make of it. But when you sort of get it to a little bit bigger, you can kind of see what's going on, and to me it seems to be a small assy picture of sorts of 2 birds flying towards the sunset. And weirdly enough, I find that oddly fits the aesthetic of this very album though. This entire musical odyssey that has been one that is far out at the sea itself, staring across at the very horizon, as the sun blares down upon us. And overhead, as mentioned in the very composition itself, is a seagull and a seagull. And so, with that, I think we might as well just come to the end of our very weird episode of Weird Music there. This is probably going to be another rather short one, but that's absolutely fine. Sometimes there's not as much to talk about. But I have to say, this is one of the most bizarre little things I've come across recently, and so a huge thanks to Music from the Internet for sharing this one and, getting it out there for people to hear. I have to say, Music from the Internet, a fantastic channel though that just presents some incredibly strange and unusual albums sourced from God knows where. And how they came across all this, I have no idea, but if you like discovering truly weird, strange, unusual albums, go check them out, of course. But to go back to this one, what a peculiar album this is, right? It's of course one that drew me in with its incredibly strange album artwork, of course, and to be fair, when I first saw that video thumbnail on their channel, I just knew I had to at least check out what strange album would be lurking within. Which I assumed would be some kind of Vaporwave nonsense, to be fair, I did kind of assume. But to my delight, it was the kind of Vaporwave I oddly enjoy, the incredibly spaced out slush wave that can be just so weirdly relaxing. And I thought it was so bizarre in so many respects that I knew I just had to try my best to present it to all of you today, essentially. And so, will we dive into more Vaporwave in the future? I honestly don't know. I don't know. This was one of those really weird moments where when I first started hearing an album, I was just like, right, let's start trying to type what I'm experiencing here and what I think of this then. And so that kind of thing doesn't come up a lot, but if it does, it does. Maybe we'll have more Vaporwave in the future if something sparks that kind of inspiration, if that makes sense. And so yeah, huge thanks for you for watching today's episode of Weird Music then. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.